you for joining me today. I'm Madelyn Blair, and this is Unlocked, a show all about opening possibilities so that when you're hit with the unexpected, you have options. In our show today, we're going to be talking with our guest on how to give and how to receive feedback. We might even talk about how to ask for feedback. And after our conversation, I'll be giving you some grounds for thought, a book that looks at feedback from another perspective. So stay tuned. I was asked to research performance evaluations. The client was really interested to see if evaluations differed when a woman was being evaluated versus a man. Through my work, I discovered a remarkable difference, which surprised me and every reader of my report. That was the day that my own evaluations of others totally changed. Stay tuned and learn how it shifted my own thinking and how you can take advantage of my lesson. But let's meet our guest, Dr. Tracy. Dr. Tracy led talent management in the Americas for a global Fortune 500 company with over 85,000 employees in 32 countries worldwide. She brings extensive organizational and leadership development experience across multiple industries, globally and domestically. Her focused approach is coaching helps to challenge and support clients as they gain personal insight, leverage their influence skills, lead change, and drive business results. In addition to her extensive work experience in developing talent, Dr. Tracy holds a doctor in education in learning and organizational change, and she is a thought leader for the Forbes Coaches Council, publishing on leadership. Dr. Karen Tracy, welcome to Unlocked.
Good morning, Madelyn. How are you?
I am very well. How about yourself?
Fine. Great to be here. Thanks for asking.
Well, you are so welcome. As we planned our show for today, I have to tell the audience, Karen was the first guest to send me questions to ask me. I loved it. As anybody who's watched the show knows, I love to get questions. So this is going to be a treat for me as well as you. Karen, let's get into it. I think we talk about feedback a lot, but what does it really mean? Because I think people have different ideas about what it means. How do you define it? And why do you think it has so many variations?
Yeah, so very simply, feedback has a variety of definitions, if you will. There are different kinds. There's performance on the job feedback, which is what we'll be talking about today. There's feedback you give your friends, your colleagues, your peers. It's just to me, it's information or data points that one can use to change your behavior, very simply.
I love that phrase, to change behavior, because there's a reason why you give feedback, especially as a manager. That's what you're hoping for. Yeah. What excites you about this? This isn't one can call it a big concept or a narrow focus. What excites you about working on feedback?
Yeah, what excites me is that feedback is the perfect gift, and it's the gift we all love to hate. That's how I describe it. Meaning, we all want it, but no one really wants to hear it. At the same time, so if it goes well, it's great. If it doesn't go well, it's something that we might dread, both in giving and receiving.
I never thought about it from the perspective of the fact that you hesitate when you think something is not going to be quite right. Or quite as nice as you would like it to be. That would be an impediment to understanding feedback and good feedback. Excellent point. So how did you develop your expertise on feedback? I certainly have my story about how I did it, but I'd love to know yours.
Through personal experience of 30 years in corporate America as an HR talent leader, I was often on the receiving end of that. So by the time, let's say, an employee would come to me with a challenge, often they were not only upset with their manager, but perhaps thinking about leaving the organization. And often it was because they didn't receive any feedback. And so it's not that it just didn't go well, they weren't hearing anything. So These things could have easily been avoided. And so what I found is when I did my research, when I did my dissertation, I chose feedback for that very reason. It's a common problem in my coaching practice today. It comes up at least once a day. And it doesn't matter what level you're at in the organization, from the C-suite on down to frontline supervisor. I would say if you're not good at feedback, it doesn't get better the higher you go.
Wow.
So it often just gets worse because people either dread it worse, or they dread it or they avoid it. And I would say the earlier you can gain experience in doing it well, the more confident and competent you'll feel in giving and receiving it.
Yeah. You've really touched on what I think is a quintessential point of that's really important in management. I've worked with so many managers who hesitated to give feedback because they thought they didn't know how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really looking forward to today's conversation, because if we can give people strategies of understanding how you do this process, it is actually not difficult in the delivery as
Mm-hmm.
long as you've done a little prep work beforehand. Good. I'm glad you got that in there. Okay. I often ask teens to give me questions because they always ask from another perspective. So
Okay.
this is one of their questions. What's the difference between feedback and unhelpful criticism?
Sometimes nothing. It could be the same, right? If it's not done well, it could be unhelpful criticism. If it's done well, feedback can actually help you move forward in a direction you want to go and help you change a behavior in a way you want to change it.
What's an example of something that is given unhelpfully?
When feedback is given and it's generic and it's not specific, it's just, hey, that was awful. Someone might say, that was horrible. That presentation was horrible. It didn't go well. If I'm the receiver of that, I don't know what specifically about that did I do or not do? What could I do more of or less of to make that better? Did I speak too frequently? Did I not speak enough? Was my voice not okay? Was my body language off? I don't know what to improve. It was feedback. It wasn't helpful.
It goes on the other side too. If somebody tells you, "Oh, that was wonderful," what I always want to say is, "What did you like about it? What did I do differently that was so wonderful?" So
Absolutely. The old, it's great job.
Yeah.
Everything. It's a great job. Great job. We appreciate that. I don't know what to do to continue the behavior that was great.
So why do you think managers in general tend to give this feedback poorly?
Common reasons we often hear one is I don't have the time. That's a big one. Okay. But time on the back end of what happens when you don't give it. But, okay. I don't have
Exactly.
time. That's the real world of I don't have time, don't want to do it, don't know how to do it. I'm afraid of how the person might react.
Yes.
So I want to avoid the conflict. I just want to keep everything status quo. And it's more comfortable not to give it sometimes than to give it if you're not comfortable, confident, and competent in giving it. So if you're not sure, people might shy away from doing it at all, which actually is worse than giving constructive feedback.
Right. Yeah, because even if you stumble, if your intention is to give feedback, I think that people they're smart enough to know when your intentions are good, that you're really trying to help the other person, even though you may cringe at the fact that they criticized the thing that you thought was the best part of what you did. Yeah. So where do you go to find useful feedback?
I mean, there's a ton of great resources out there in the literature. Harvard Business Review has great articles on how to give feedback. You've got Center for Creative Leadership. You've got the Gallup organization, which frequently cites proper steps on how to give feedback. Very simply, it doesn't have to be complicated. It just needs to be clear and specific and timely. And with that, those are some of the strategies and steps we can talk about today. But some people have this perception that it has to be perfect. So if I don't know how to do it, I'm just not going to do it at all.
Yeah. I liked your word timely also. Oftentimes, when I see someone do something, especially when I see them do something well, I highlight it for them. I just said, you just created this little piece. Maybe you wrote something, maybe you handled a telephone call really well. And I would say, this, you did it well. Thank you. And it's amazing how that immediate feedback is energizing for the individual. Certainly, if it's positive. If it's negative, that's different. But certainly when it's positive, that timeliness is important. Maybe we really should talk about how you should give feedback.
I can do that. I'm curious as to hear about your experience as well. Would you like to share that now, or would you like to wait and
No,
talk
I'd
about
be
the
happy
steps?
to.
Yeah, I'm curious because we've all had experiences with it, and I'd like to hear yours.
Okay. I think one of the turning points was I had just become a division chief at the World Bank. Now, division chiefs at the World Bank, they don't exist anymore because they're now called something else. But I was managing like 70 people. And so I went into my first evaluation. Yeah, we had really done some amazing stuff in the division. And I had it all listed out of what we had done. And basically, I was told, you're doing a great job. I said, but there's one thing you need to improve. There are too many typos coming out of your division. I was so deflated because they didn't say you created this, you were successful here. They said you have too many typos. And I didn't even type at that time. So I just threw my hands and I thought, this is nonsense. So I decided I would discount his feedback entirely and I would do it for myself. But that was a real experience of when you can completely deflate a person with a really stupid piece of feedback. All right, so what did I do? And what did I learn over time? You've already cited a couple of those. One is it has to be timely. Yes, you can wait until the annual time, but what a lost opportunity when you could be highlighting something that a person's doing well all along. And of course, if they're going to make a mistake, you get some feedback quickly there because then there could be implications. The other is the specificity. You really tagged it well. When I received feedback like you were effective in this presentation because, Madelyn, you were very clear, you stayed on time, whatever those things are, that says to me, okay, that's what I do more of. When I did my dissertation years ago, I had an amazing advisor. He never told me what I did wrong. He only told me what I did right. What I did when I heard that was I figured out, okay, what is he not talking about? And I just did more of what he said. And every now and then I could figure out something that I did wrong and I just wouldn't do it again. That was so powerful for me. So that was another thing that I learned. So specificity, timeliness. I think another, and this took me years, is to get my emotion out of it. Allow myself the time to really think through what I want to say to that person and why I want to say it to that person, and just get my emotion out of it and then present it to them. It's not that it becomes vapid because there's no energy in it, but at least it doesn't convey that additional emotional potency.
So, Madelyn, I'm curious how, this is a challenge for a lot of people. How did you get your emotion out of it? What did you do?
I did a lot of thinking about what was really important to me and what was really important to the person themselves, to the business at hand. And it takes thought and it takes time. So you have to be willing to invest that in it. But once you can link either positive or negative to the outcome, in a way, you have finished it. And so you can say, okay, I understand now that linkage, and the energy is stripped, the emotion goes away because the emotion comes from being uncertain, I think. So that's one of the ways I did it.
And was that for giving or receiving or both?
I would say both. Except I love getting positive feedback. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that holds true for exactly what I looked at in a lot of my research was the receiver's perspective of getting feedback. But it goes both ways. How do I think through and think about the behavior I'm giving feedback on and be specific. So remove the emotion, it's about the behavior. And how, as a receiver, if I'm not hearing that behavior, what to do more of or less of, how do I then ask, not, without defensiveness, to get clarity
Yeah.
about what it is I need to do more of or less of?
Oh, that reminds me of I mentioned at the beginning that I had done some research on gender evaluation, the differences. And when I worked with male managers, they were really terrified because it was this was 20, 30 years ago. So they were very sensitive about this. Am I doing this? And I said, let me focus on behaviors. I love your word.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, look, there's going to be a time when you're going to do something wrong and you're going to recognize it afterwards. I said, then as time goes by, as long as you think about it, you'll recognize it in the middle of doing it. And maybe you can even correct at that point. I said, and then eventually you'll learn to figure it out before you do it. And then you can change your behavior. It gave them such comfort to know that they could take control of how they interacted with others because I'd just given them this simple process.
Exactly. And in doing so, the fear is reduced because you feel more confident about what you're going to say. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Great questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Great insight.
Oh, gosh. So let's try to really get into this aspect of
Okay.
more of the technique. Let's do some examples of how I can ask for feedback, for example. How can I ask for it and know that the other person recognizes that I'm asking for sincere, helpful feedback and not just a pat on the back?
Mm-hmm. So, very simply, before you ask for feedback, I would encourage people or invite people to ask for feedback from someone you trust, because the more you use, you get feedback for a reason, which is to change your behavior, right? Otherwise, it's just nice information. And if you think of feedback as data or information points, some you may choose to act on and some you may choose not to. However, you don't know what to choose from if you don't get the information. So the fact is, if you're looking for information, you can seek it by asking the person, and I would say a person whom you trust. And that could be a manager. If not, it could be peers, it could be direct reports, all kinds of resources, your family, people to get feedback from. But in the workplace, generally speaking, oftentimes it's you want feedback from your manager. So people first need to know that it's okay to ask. The number of people who think, is it okay for me to even ask that? If I'm not getting it, should I ask? Absolutely ask. Now, you may not get the information you need, but you're going to get some information. Might be positive, might be constructive. Then you can choose as a receiver what to do with it. But by starting by asking someone you trust and someone that's a credible source. So someone you deem as credible in terms of being someone who knows you, has been around you long enough, has observed your behavior, whom you trust to give you the candid feedback that you're looking for. Now, it may not be all the information you can use, but it's a start. And so from there, you're more likely to take it in and then decide, of the information I received, positive or constructive, what do I need to do or what am I choosing to act on? The choice is yours, but you can't choose if you don't have the information.
So what I'm hearing you say is just screw up your courage and ask, but ask the right person. So maybe the first step is to do a kind of a review of all the potential people that who know you. And I think that's a very good point that you made. They have to have observed you doing what it is you want feedback on.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's why I think peer feedback is so good because you're working together all the time.
It's a safe place to start. So if you're concerned about doing it and trying it out, start with someone you trust, a peer, and you're going into a meeting, a workplace meeting, and you're practicing how to be clear and concise in your delivery. Ask a peer who's sitting in the meeting if you're not comfortable asking your manager or if your manager's not there. But if you're working on it, I would say that ask the person though before the meeting. So say, hey, when we go into this meeting, I'm looking for you to give me some feedback on my clarity and conciseness in my delivery. Are you comfortable doing that? Would you be okay doing that? Sure. Okay. So two things just happened. One, you're letting the person know what to look for, the person giving the feedback. And you're also asking them specifically what you want the feedback on so that they know how to target the information and you get what you need out of the conversation.
That is such helpful advice. You're right. If the person knows, and now let me say that differently. When you say, look at these things, am I clear, am I concise, etc., what you're conveying to them indirectly is, I'm working on this. Help me do this better. I like that a lot. Yeah, because then the person can focus. In fact, I will often use that just to help people be more attentive to what I have to say. Because when you're asked to do a task like that, you have to stay attentive to the speaker. So it's another way to get, not necessarily, you get feedback, of course, but you also get somebody actually more deeply engaged in your presentation. Yeah. Okay, so that's one strategy. Let's flip it around and say, now let's say that I'm a manager and I'm watching people and I see someone who really has an area that they need to improve. How do they prepare for that, and how do they deliver that kind of message?
Do you have a specific area in mind?
Let's say they don't take their work seriously enough. They'll do casual mistakes and they won't catch them. They won't think that's an important piece of their work.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say is a person's making frequent mistakes and they're not catching them. So the manager wants to give them feedback on how to decrease the number of mistakes that they're making and to review their work, perhaps. Is that correct?
You're absolutely correct, because that's the behavior that I want. What I'm thinking in my mind is, no, I want them to really love their job. But you're right. It comes down to behavior. You can't ask a person to love the job, but you can ask them to work more effectively. So with that in mind, how do we do this?
So as the manager, I begin with the end in mind. What is it I want the person to do more of or less of that they're not doing? How do I close the gap in what they're doing today to get them to the desired state, if you will, of performance? Now, if I want them to turn in a document, if you will, without having reviewing it with zero mistakes, let's just say, or at least the goal of making it clear, I would then, and I'm noticing current state, the person's turning in documents with a lot of typos, to your point, a lot of mistakes that are just, maybe they haven't reviewed it or maybe they don't know. So the observation of the behavior is I need them to have fewer mistakes. That's the outcome I'm looking for as a manager. So in speaking with the person, just obviously and would like to give you some feedback, and specifically on the paper that you turned in yesterday, I had the opportunity to review it. And from my perspective, it had a lot of mistakes in it, specifically on page 2. There were quite a few mistakes in there. The goal would really to be error-free. What are your thoughts around what I just shared with you?
You made me do it in such a short period of time. How can I finish it and get to all these mistakes?
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say is you didn't have enough time to review the document. Is that right?
No, I just didn't feel I did.
So what would be more helpful to you going forward as we do our another document next week? What would be most helpful to you?
I think if I could just get it a day sooner.
Okay. And by getting it a day sooner, I'm hearing you say you'd have a chance to review it and perhaps zero mistakes or fewer.
Yeah, see, because when I work, I like to do it and let it sit and then come back to it and review it, because then I can see the mistakes more easily.
I'm happy to give you an extra day. I'll give you the information a day ahead if that gives you more time to review. How do you feel about doing that?
I'm looking forward to it because it feels more comfortable to me. Yes, thanks you. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
I think we had a great intervention there, didn't we?
A couple things. If you just look at it, a quick example, a couple things just to observe as we talk about this is, one, Feedback doesn't need to be lengthy. It can be very quick, just in time, real time, as appropriate, one-on-one, in private. You and I can have this dialogue. It didn't take long. I, as a manager, wanted to focus on what is it I need to have happen differently with this employee that's not happening today to help them move forward. But I'm not quite sure what that might be to help them move forward. So I better ask as well. So I'll give them the feedback, but I'll also invite their thoughts around what they could do. So a couple things that does is it promotes ownership, because now you just took ownership as employee of, if I have the extra day, which I gave you, you're choosing to say, I can make this better.
There were several strategies there. I love the fact that you ask the person what they suggest after you have given the feedback. I like that. There were a couple of other things. I didn't write them down because I was so excited about what you were saying. But we'll come back and we'll fill those in, because I think those are some great strategies.
As a manager too, another opportunity is always I can ask the employee, to your point, but also offer my support. So what does support look like? And for some people, I don't know what that support would look like for you. In your case, it was, I need an extra day. The turnaround time's not realistic. Now, if you don't tell me that, I don't know that. So I might just keep giving you the same thing week after week. And I'm like, you're not correcting these mistakes because we're not solving the right problem. So I don't know how to help if you don't tell me. And so there's some ownership on the employee as well to say, she's asking, now I need to speak up and say, here's how you can help me. Now, I may be able to accommodate that, or I may not. But if not, then what else could we do to help you move forward?
Yeah. Okay. While you were talking, I also remembered one of the things you talked about was get in touch with what your real goal is. I thought that was a good one. Giving the feedback, then asking, and then offering support. Wow. I think we're developing some good strategies here. Okay. Let's do an example of how you can, and maybe we have done it, but let's just amplify it a bit. How to ask for feedback. Now, you gave me the example of the speech. What is another example where you really want critical feedback?
So again, hopefully, if you're my manager, let's say a trusted advisor or somebody I consider a credible source, and I go back to that I want to get feedback on. Oftentimes it's how I show up in a meeting. It's a very common one. I keep bringing it up, but it's a very common one in terms of, is my delivery clear and concise? I shared that before. Or how is my performance in general? So it's meeting, how do I not only show up, but how am I working to ask good questions? How am I listening? What is it about it that I want? So I would then ask you for, whether it's a meeting or perhaps just my dialogue with you. How am I engaging you in a way that invites you to give me feedback? Meaning, am I asking questions?
Yes.
Am I listening when you tell me?
Yeah.
Am I acting without defensiveness? Am I doing anything about it?
Nice. You bring up new dimensions to this. I'm really excited about this. The more we get feedback as well, the more we can understand ourselves and how we present ourselves to the world. And that understanding is so important in building confidence in what we do. And that's also one of the key points of becoming a more resilient person. When you are really confident in who you are, you can be more resilient because you have the confidence that you have that capacity. So I like this. I like the direction of this altogether. Okay, I'm going to give you a little tougher example that I want you to give some feedback on. What if a person is just a bully? How do you manage that with feedback?
I'm perceiving that you're bullying me. Is that, and I'm giving you feedback?
Yes, not
Okay.
necessarily. Maybe you're the manager and this person is bullying other people in the division.
Okay. Okay. Have, ideally, I've observed you doing this and I can speak firsthand. And the reason I bring that up is it's important to use I statements,
Mm,
especially about behavior that I have observed you doing.
mm,
There's times when perhaps as a manager, if you were bullying others, I wasn't in the room, but I've gotten feedback from others that this behavior occurred. In that case, I can't use that I observed the behavior, but what I can speak to is that as your manager, okay, I can speak to, I've received some concerns from your peers that you've been bullying them. And by bullying, what they're saying is that you were very speaking down to them. You were very condescending in how you were speaking to them. You weren't including them in things. And they felt like they were not a peer. They were actually someone who worked for you. And it didn't feel very good. The impact to the team when you do that is it's affecting everyone's motivation and engagement. And so I'd like to invite your response to that and help me understand a little bit from your perspective what you might do going forward.
I wish I could play act this one, but I can't.
So one thing I just noticed I didn't do is I didn't tell you when it occurred. And I probably should have ideally said, hey, last week I received some feedback from your team members that you did XYZ. Ideally. Now, you don't always have all that information. Sometimes it's just people complaining to you. However, if it's not your observation, then you need to say, I'm sharing this information. Still use your I statements because it's important for our team to move
Yeah.
forward together. And the observation or the perception is this based on information I received. Agree or disagree, the perception is their reality. Invite the person then to respond to that or to talk about what they might do differently. But you, again, ideally, the more specific you can be, the more helpful, because then the person knows what happened, when it happened. I wasn't there to observe it, and you may not always be. But then
No, you can't possibly be,
you can't
especially if
speak
you have a
for
large group.
others, but you can speak to the perception of the complaints that you were getting. So I have received complaints. You can speak to that.
In your experience, have you ever dealt with a bully? And if you did that, did they ever respond?
I have not, to answer your question. So I don't know that I can speak to how that felt because I have not received it.
Okay.
And so, yeah.
I, I ask this question because it is one of the tougher things to deal with. I was in a situation where there was an individual bullying everybody, but I was not in a position to give the feedback. It would have been totally inappropriate for me to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting because it was the elephant in the room. Everybody knew it, but there was no one who the people who were responsible and should have stepped forward did not. So in the background afterwards, I did talk to them and say, you realize that this person is a bully. And eventually they took note, but it was a very difficult situation, not for me personally, but I could see that the team was really suffering. I hate to get into this too much, but it's such a big issue when people really have to experience it. I think that what I'd like to do is let's summarize some of these strategies that you've talked about. The fact that you want to make sure you have your goals in mind before you give the feedback, to ask the person for their ideas. You've given many other things. Let's come back to those strategies. What are some?
Yeah, so when you're giving feedback, again, preferably use I statements.
I statement.
Speak to, be specific and be timely
Yeah.
as much as possible. And
Mm-hmm.
when I say specific, very specific about behavior. And I say
Mm.
that because it's not about you or me, Madeline. It's about the behavior that was occurring. And once you put that out there as the behavior, now we got something we can work on together, or you can move forward or take action on.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, it becomes more of a defense mechanism of I'm telling you did something. No, it's about here's the behavior I observed you doing. Also, here's the impact to others when you did that, or the impact to me if it's just you and me.
Mm. As you're saying that, I'm thinking to myself, okay, if I were in that situation again where we had the bully in the room,
Mm-hmm.
I think if I had thought about it and could get my emotions out of the way, because I was so
Mm-hmm.
angry.
Mm-hmm.
He was hurting people. I could watch him hurt people. I think I could have said, when you say such and such, are you aware that people interpret this way? That's the kind of, I'm thinking to myself, that would be a way that I could convey, not that you're being a bully, but that this is what happens when you say or do such and such. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Yes. So it's if that feels real different than labeling me something, it
Mm.
tells me that I said or did something in my behavior that impacted the team or the people in the room in a negative manner.
Yeah.
Now I could choose to act on it or not, but it's not, again, it's focusing on the behavior for the person. So now they know specifically what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, it actually reminds me of the research that I mentioned at the very beginning. The difference between when men evaluated women versus when they evaluated other men.
Mm.
And it comes back to this word specific.
Mm-hmm.
The men did not even see what the women had accomplished. So they would say things like, you're a joy to have in the unit, or it's always a pleasure to work with you. That's nice. But what they really should be saying is, you solved a big economic problem,
Mm-hmm.
or you created this framework that worked when we brought it to the client. And at the end of that research, my advice and recommendation, and I can tell you it was years ago, but it's still quite valid. Oftentimes in performance evaluations, as you well know, the person themselves is supposed to write their own evaluation.
Mm-hmm.
In there, I told women, make sure you write those things. Make sure they know that you've done 6 amazing projects in the last year,
Mm-hmm.
so that they can refer to them. And that was part of our strategy. There were other things, but that was the really big aha that we got out of that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This has been an incredible conversation. I haven't really talked about feedback myself, even though I think about it at times. In fact, I think about it a lot. Is there anything that you would like me to ask you now to make sure that we've brought this together for you?
I've got a question for you again. I'm curious about all the research you've done on resilience. And several times today, I know I've listened to several of your podcasts around that and some of your research studying that resilience in terms of some of the key components that you might want to refresh us on today. But one that stood out to me was about choice and making decisions. And to me, there's quite the overlay with feedback there about what do I do with the information, right?
Yes.
And who owns that and the choice in I choose to act on it or not act on it. But could you talk a little bit about your perception or your view on the resilience and perhaps how that influences one's ability to act on feedback?
As I said earlier, as the better you know who you are, you know what you bring to the table. And it gives you confidence. And in fact, there's a wonderful article in Harvard Business Review about the findings of if a person is more confident, they are more competent, they're more creative, they communicate better, and they're more resilient. So there was a lot of benefits that come out of building the confidence of a person, building understanding of who they are. So in feedback, you're getting these insights like holding up a mirror so that you begin to see more and more of who you are. And it's not a question of liking or disliking. It's just who you are. And that builds your confidence in saying, okay, this is who I'm going to present to the world. So when we're talking about feedback, I think it's a great way to build that confidence level and therefore your resilience level as well. Did I answer your question? Because I can get excited about when I talk about resilience.
Yes, I'm curious in terms of, is a resilient person, in your view, better at receiving feedback then?
Oh, I think no question. If you really worked on this and nurtured your resilience, you're nurturing your confidence. And yes, they may say this is a behavior that could change to improve this outcome. You would look at that and say, okay, I understand that. And I can choose whether I want to produce that outcome or something else. Yeah, because choice, you're absolutely right. Choice is critical. To me, that's where resilience lies, is you choosing how you want to move forward.
And that was my observation as well. It really stood out to me when I listened to your presentations on resilience. And I thought, this is one of the differentiators, right? In terms of how a person chooses to act or not act on feedback, it is about the resilience.
That's right.
And I was very curious to get your perspective on that as well, in terms of your personal experience, if you've observed that with others.
Absolutely. I have. Well, I hate to say this, but we're almost out of time. But I do want to give you an opportunity to say whatever final words you have, because I have so appreciated your comments and your insights that you have shared today.
Thank you for the time and the opportunity. It's been wonderful and quite an honor to work with you. So I guess my final thoughts around this is, one of the things I always tell people with feedback, the feedback is just information. It's a data point. So getting it and asking for it is the start. But most important, what's going to differentiate you as a leader, it's not what you know, but what you do with what you know that will really differentiate you. And in that lies a choice, right? So I take in the information, I receive it, and then I choose whether I'm going to pay attention to it and do something about it or ignore it. And the dynamics with that is, okay, am I getting the information first, which I go back to a trusted advisor, a credible source? And if so, I'm more likely to take that information and act on it. Then I can make the choice and say, okay, I may not agree with all the information. It really doesn't matter. But is there pieces of the information in there that I could take, data points, that would help me move forward in the direction I want to go? Again, I'm making a choice. So at the end of the day, to me, how do you want to choose to show up, and what do you want to do with what you know?
Karen, thank you so much. I really appreciate all you have brought to the day.
Thank you, Madelyn. It's been great. Appreciate it.
All right. And now, every now and then, there is something that changes how I think about the world. Grounds for Thought is the place where I talk about these moments so that you can explore the meaning for yourself. And today, I'm going to talk about another form of feedback. It's where you help the individual or the organization to give feedback to themselves. There was a book called Reframing Evaluation Through Appreciative Inquiry. It looks like this. It's by Haley Preskill and Tessie Savaras Katsambas. When I read this, it changed the way I interview people. It changed the way I respond to an interview. It changed the way I prepared for an evaluation session with one of my staff. I discovered it changed the way I interview. Here's the change. The appreciative inquiry process, or I like to call it a philosophy, because appreciative inquiry really is about looking at what is happening, behaviors, ideas, etc., and what actually works, and focusing there. So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about when it comes to asking questions. Here's a typical kind of question of somebody doing an evaluation. How often does your supervisor communicate with you? Okay, clear, right? Do you feel that this communication is adequate? All right. When you need approval, what is the process you follow to get approval? Very specific. All right. Contrast that to the appreciative approach. I'd like you to think about a time when, as a staff member in this department, you had an exceptional experience. When you were most proud of being here doing this work. You know that you were making a difference in the lives of people you were serving. Think back and tell me a story about that experience. Now, that's a remarkably different way to ask the question. When you use this approach, it is doubly remarkable in terms of the information you end up gathering. Because in the midst of that story, you hear things like, the manager told me clearly what I needed to do. So there was an aspect of the communication. There's all kinds of things that will come out of the telling of that story, of the time when the staff member had an exceptional experience, something they were really proud of. You also discover in those moments that the kinds of people and the kinds of support that they got during that task. It is a very powerful way to learn a great deal. When I interview people, I often, especially if I'm trying to hire them or thinking about hiring them, I'll often ask that kind of question. I remember one time asking a woman, what about this? And she ended up telling me about a race that she ran in Africa where she was visiting. And it apparently was a very difficult course, very hot, very dry. And as she explained it to me and described that experience, I learned enormous things about her persistence, her discipline, her joy in life and living. So you can obviously conclude that I hired her, and I did. A different way to get information about people. Very powerful. Appreciative Inquiry, Reframing Evaluation Through Appreciative Inquiry by Haley Preskill, Tessie Tsavaras Katsambas. All about helping individuals and organizations give feedback to themselves. And by the way, the feedback to themselves is there as well. When I have asked people these questions and gotten their stories, oftentimes they will come to the end and say, I haven't thought that in a while. And I've suddenly realized now, and they'll say something that they never thought of before. They'll recognize their own strengths. They'll recognize the particular individual who helped them along the way. Karen was talking about finding people that you trust. This is a great place. Just tell yourself your own stories, and suddenly you'll see and find those people that you can go to and ask for the feedback that you want. Very different way of thinking about it. Many people have asked me to work with them on a specific issue or a general need or a desire sometimes. It has been managerial, personal, career-oriented. If you're curious about how this can happen for you, send me an email to madelyn@madelynblair.com. I will get back to you. And I want to thank you for joining me today. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation and learned something new. I know I did. And by the way, if you're on YouTube, please click the like button, and better yet, subscribe. I'm Madelyn Blair, wishing you infinite possibilities as you unlock possibilities for yourself.